In this video, we're going to take a look at how we can classify costs differently for different purposes. In particular, we're told in this problem that the Dozer Company produced and sold 1,000 units during its first month of operations and it reported $185,000 in total cost. And we would classify these costs differently depending on what our goal is. If we're preparing financial statements, we're going to think about classifying our cost as either product costs, which provide a future benefit, or period costs that don't provide a future benefit. Recall the matching principle says we want to match cost with the revenues they help generate. So if we've got a factory and we're making product, all of those costs are going to be capitalized, again, means recorded as an asset, and then matched with revenues in future periods when we sell them. The costs that we incur outside of our factory are considered period costs, and they go directly to our income statement. Another way we can break down this $185,000 costs is if we have a goal of assigning them to particular cost objects. And to do that, we need to break our costs down into direct, those that we can trace directly to a particular cost object. And that cost object can change, and we'll talk about that here in just a second, or indirect, and those are costs that can't be traced directly to a cost object, but instead need to be allocated. Let's think of an airline, jet fuel. We can trace the cost of jet fuel to a particular flight. So that would, we can directly trace it to a particular flight. So that would be a direct cost for a flight. But we can't trace airline fuel to a particular passenger. So we would need to allocate that cost to a passenger. So if our cost object is a passenger, airline fuel would be indirect. But if it's the flight itself, then airline fuel will be a direct cost. Think here at Millersville University. If we have a cost object of a particular student, then my salary can't be directly traced to any one particular student. If we have a cost object that is a particular class, well then a portion of my salary can be directly traced to a particular class. I would need to allocate it to a particular student, just arbitrary, but we can trace it directly to a class, but we can't trace my salary cost to a particular student. Another way we might want to consider our cost is to predict how our costs and profits might change in response to changes in our level of production. And to do that, we need to isolate and break down this $185,000 by behavior, either variable or fixed. And recall, fixed costs will remain constant as long as we are operating within our relevant range, where variable costs will increase as our level of production goes up, and variable costs in total will decrease as our level of production goes down. Keep in mind, though, our variable cost per unit always remains constant. So if we're given our total variable cost, the first thing we want to do is express that on a per unit basis. So we'll take our 50,000 and divide it by 1,000 units, and we've got a variable cost of $50 per unit. Direct labor, 30 divided by 1,000, it's $30 per unit. Variable manufacturing overhead, the 15,000 divided by 1,000, we've got $15 per unit. Variable selling is also $15 per unit. Make sure you're using Excel formulas for this, because these are the numbers I've given you right now. But we want to build models that are flexible. So if, let's say that instead of 15,000, variable manufacturing overhead had been 20,000, well then our cost per unit would have been $20. So make sure you're using cell references or links in any cell that appears as a yellow cell on your worksheet. If, on the other hand, you were given variable cost per unit, that's great for variable costs, but we would want to take that cost per unit and multiply it by number of units to get fixed costs in total. What we care about are fixed costs in total and variable costs on a per unit basis. Guess I shouldn't have highlighted that one. All right, let's go ahead and look at how we would classify costs for preparing financial statements. Before I do that, though, I'm going to come in here. I'm going to put my cursor here at cell A20, And I'm going to freeze the panes on this worksheet. I would encourage you to do it also. It'll make your work a lot easier. So we're going to go up to View, and we are going to freeze panes. That way, as I scroll down the worksheet, I can see the place I'm working, and my inputs will also be visible. So what are our total product costs? Our product costs are going to be direct materials, direct labor, and I can actually copy that down, and what? Fixed manufacturing overhead. And we're going to add all of those up. An easy way to sum those, if I just go up to Home and find that Auto Sum button, I can add them up, or I can just type in the formula. But I've added up my total product costs, my period costs, that's going to be my variable selling, 15, my variable admin of 5, my variable admin of, my fixed selling expense of, fixed selling expense of 16, and my fixed admin expense of 24. So period costs are selling and administrative. Product costs are costs that we're incurring in our factory. Our direct material, direct labor, manufacturing overhead. Let's add those up. And our total costs per unit. Oh, we need to do what? We need to take the 60 plus the 125 and divide it by the number of units we produced. So equals 125 plus 60 divided by our 1,000 units that we've produced and sold, 185. If we sell our units for $200 a piece and our average cost is 185, that means our profit per unit is 200 minus 185. We're making a profit of $15 per unit. Keep that $15 per unit in mind, because we're going to see our profit per unit will change. It'll go up if we produce more units and can spread our fixed cost out over more units. All right, let's go ahead and think about how we would break our costs down between direct costs and indirect cost if we want to assign them to cost objects. And in this case, our cost object is going to be units of production. So if we're talking about units of production, our only direct costs will be direct materials and direct labor. So let's go ahead and pick those up. Direct materials of 50, direct labor of 30, and our total direct product costs are 80,000. Our indirect manufacturing costs are our variable manufacturing overhead of 15 and our fixed manufacturing overhead of 30. We can't trace our manufacturing overhead to a particular product or unit. We need to allocate it. So we're going to consider those indirect costs, and our total indirect product cost, $45,000. Now we're going to look at how our costs change in response to changes in our activity levels within our relevant range. And when we're doing that, we need to make sure that we break our costs down into variable, because our variable costs will increase in total. They remain constant on a per unit basis, but will increase in total, while our fixed costs will remain constant in total, but we find they decrease if we produce more units, or our cost per unit will increase if we produce fewer units. So what's our variable cost per unit? That's simple. It's our $50 per unit for direct materials, our 30 for direct labor, our 15 for variable manufacturing overhead, our 15 for variable selling, and our $5 for variable admin. So our total variable cost per unit is $115 per unit. That's what it costs us, or how much our costs will change every time we manufacture and sell an additional unit of product. All right, what are our fixed costs? Our fixed manufacturing costs, and we're doing these in total. $30,000 for fixed manufacturing overhead. Fixed selling is $16,000, and our fixed admin is 24,000 for a total of 70,000. Now, we've got to calculate that on a per unit basis. And again, making sure we use our cell references. 70,000 divided by 1,000 units is $70 per unit. If our number of units produced had been, instead of 1,000, had been 2,000, our cost per unit, instead of being 70, would be 35 for fixed costs. Of course, if we had only produced 500, our fixed cost per unit would have been, instead of 70, it would be 140. All right. What's our average fixed cost? Average total cost per unit. Our average total cost is our 115 variable plus our 70 fixed, or 185. And just as we found before, our average profit per unit is going to be was $15. And if we sell one more unit, how much will our profits go up? So recall earlier, we said we were making a profit of $15 per unit. So our first inclination would be, if we sell one more unit, our profit, we would think, would go up by another $15. But that's not the case, because recall, our fixed costs per unit will do what? They will go down slightly. Let's go ahead and calculate incremental revenue. It's what? $200 per unit times 1 unit. Our incremental cost, the only thing that changes is what? Our variable cost. We make one more unit, we'll incur another $115 in costs, which means our profits will go up 200 minus 115. Our profits will go up by $85. What if we sold an extra 100 units? Well, at an extra 100 units, we would have incremental revenue, $200 per unit times 100 units. Our incremental cost will be the 100 additional units times the $115 variable cost per unit. So our profits will go up 20 minus the 11,500. Our profits will go up by 8,500. And our average cost per unit at this higher level of production, it's going to be our variable cost per unit, which was, again, 115, plus the $70,000 in fixed cost divided by the total number of units. And originally we were producing 1,000, and now we're producing what? An additional 100 units. So our new average cost per unit is $178.64. So what's our average profit per unit? We're going to take our 200. We're going to subtract our average cost per unit, and we can see our average profit, 200 minus the 178, is 2136. And that's higher than our average cost per profit that we calculated up top, which was what? Remember, our average cost or profit per unit was $15. Well, our average profit per unit has gone up because we've done what? Produced more units and spread our fixed cost out over those additional units. So we've lowered our average cost per unit.